Hey guys, hope all is well. I'm coming to you on a Sunday after the World Cup final. Congratulations to France. It was a really, really entertaining game. Um, Man, I actually thought Croatia had a really good shot at it. Thought they played a better second half, but France on the counterattack is something else. I want to continue the series that I started yesterday, which is sort of like game of the day, best thing I saw today that really caught my eye. Just sort of keeping with the theme that, every day I'm looking at chess and I'm looking at a few games and, I just, try to just see what's happening in the world of chess. And there's a game that definitely caught my eye between two strong grandmasters in the Dortmund event. Nisipeanu, I think is the white player. I think he played for Romania for a long time. I don't know if he's still a Romanian player, but he's a strong 2670 player. And then Jan-Krzysztof Duda from Poland, who's an emerging young talent who may still actually be a junior. If not, he's probably 21, 22 years old with the FIDE rating well over 2700. So, let's just get right into it. I'm going to flip the board just because I think Black was the one really doing the things that I thought were interesting here. And there we go. All right. So E4, C5, Sicilian, sharpest opening in the game, or one of the sharpest at least. Knight F3, D6, inviting the open Sicilian with a Nardov type of setup, perhaps, after D4. But D4 is not played. Instead, Bishop D5 check was played. And Bishop B5 check is an interesting one. It's sort of the canal line of the against the Sicilian. It's a more of a positional variation. Of course, the main lines here are D4, start with D4, and then C takes, knight takes D4. And Black had sort of decided to play knight F6, knight C3, A6, or G6 with the dragon, or E6 with the Scheveningen, or knight C6 with the classical. And that's interpreted like the open Sicilian line. So opting for Bishop B5 check sort of says, no, I want to play a more positional approach, a little bit slower developing line. And there are three moves here, three legal moves. There's four legal moves, but interposing with the queen doesn't make sense. Black basically Duda chose the most popular one, which is Bishop D7. I've made the opinion that it's actually the most dry, but it's a solid line. If you really want to go for it with Black here, you can go knight D7. That's been played quite a bit, just sort of, keeping some pieces on the board, and maybe you play A6 and wind up getting a bishop pair for your troubles. Bishop D7, I always thought was a little bit, solid, but nothing more than that. I've actually played the white side of this myself after Bishop D7. Bishop takes, queen takes, which happened. I, as a white player, like move C4. The point is that you've gotten your light squared bishop outside of the chain, and now you have sort of a Maroczy bind type setup on the D5 pawn after white eventually goes D4, and without the light squared bishop in the chain. Obviously, Nisipeanu had something else in mind because he didn't go C4, he castled instead, which is also a good move. I mean, castling's never a bad move, but play continued, knight F6, rook E1, knight C6, and note that E5 always looks like it's in the air, but right now E5 is really not a big threat. It doesn't really do anything because Black has enough pieces on it to just trade and play E6 and continue developing, and Black would have a very good position here. So as long as Black sort of holds up this E5 push, Black should be okay. So because E5 is not a possibility, White went for C3, and after C3, E6 happened. Makes a lot of sense. And D4, C takes, and now E5 is actually a legitimate idea in many positions because, White can see some space on the king side, and maybe, I don't know, E5 is just a legitimate idea. So because of that, Black actually plays D5. And the point is he wants to lock up White's pawns on the dark squares, and actually Black has a dark squared bishop, so it makes sense that he wants his pawns on light squares, his opponents on dark squares. So essentially the point is also that you're making the white pawn on e4 make a decision. So if e takes d5, for instance, knight takes d5, this would really not be desirable for the white player, because now white has a weak isolated pawn, and I like to talk ad nauseum about pawn islands. In this position, white would have 3 pawn islands. These 3, these 2, and then the one on d4. Whereas black would have 2 pawn islands. So always keeping aware of like isolated pawns, pawn islands, because those become long-term weaknesses or assets later in the game. So because of that, after d5, white played e5, which makes more sense. But now white plays this nice square in the middle for the knight. So typically, I always thought knight e4 was the move here. This is actually the thing that maybe shocked me a little bit, because I always thought knight e4 just made the most sense to just go forward in the center. There's no way to really dislodge the knight with a pawn because this knight f3 is in the way. So I'm wondering why knight e4 wasn't played. Maybe knight c3, or maybe knight c3 just challenging the knight was something that white didn't want to deal with. But even here, I think that black should be fine in a position like this, because this pawn, while the chain did become longer, the c3 pawn might be a little bit weak, and the square in front of it, the c4 square, might be weak. And again, we see this theme of 3 pawn, it sort of looks like they're 3 pawn islands, but technically there would only be 2 if the f4 pawn was connected to the e5 pawn. And this a2 pawn is very weak to me. So I'm wondering why knight e4 wasn't played. I mean, another way you can consider dislodging this knight is just actually knight bd2, and maybe that was a cause of concern, because after knight takes, bishop takes, I mean, the knight isn't there, but I still don't buy this position being super harmful for black. White does have more space, which is an asset, so you can consider maybe a knight g5 and, whoops, that's not where I want to go, knight g5 and maybe queen h5 idea down the line. That's certainly a potentiality. But yeah, I'd be very curious to know why knight e4 wasn't the move. That being said, maybe it's just some pieces would have been traded off, and the position maybe would have been a little bit too dry, and Duda is a high-rate player and wanted to keep us on the board. That's always a thought there. So anyways, instead of knight e4, knight g8 was played. And this is where I just found this really, really interesting, because essentially black is sacrificing time to get his knight to what he perceives to be the ideal square, which is f5. If this knight can relocate from e7 to f5, or in some cases h6 to f5, although probably not such a good idea here to go to h6 because bishop takes h6 is a move, spoiling again, there's a lot of arrows, spoiling black's pawn structure after g takes h6. If this knight gets to f5 meaningfully, you can sort of see that those knights would really both do a great job of putting some pressure on the d4 square. And there's an interesting rationale to it. The question is does black actually have the time to really transgress in this type of long-term maneuver? Knight g8, very, very unusual. The benefit for black here, the argument that black has time enough to do this, is that the position is relatively closed. The center is fixed now, and it's not clear that there's going to be another break before the knight can get to f5. So unless white drums up something really quickly, it's doubtful that black will have any problems and could start to entertain playing for the win. But one may argue with knight g8, black is already trying to play for the win. So, anyways, knight g8, a3 was played. I don't love this move. I think I can't really explain it because I don't think b4 is actually a legitimate idea here, because you just sort of weaken more squares on the c file. For instance, if white goes, let's say knight g7 was played, so I'll just go there. If b4 is played here, now the c4 square is really weak and the a4 square is a little weak, but especially c4. So if a pawn goes to b5, this knight may go to a5 and then to c4, and those light squares on the queen side would be really weak. So I don't actually understand why a3 was played. Maybe it was a waiting move to sort of see what black would do, see what the strategy was, but I'm not buying it as a plan. I don't think a3 was a good move. So a3 was played, knight g7, knight c3, and what happened here? Okay, h5. Okay, so that h5 is, again, a very enterprising move, right? So not only does black want to have the knight on f5, black also wants to keep the knight on f5. So I assume the idea with that was that if knight f5 right away, white could play g4, and the knight wouldn't be secure there. It would have to go back. Although even this wouldn't be the end of the world now, because now black would have a target by playing, black can now play h5 at some point, undermining the g4 pawn and opening the line for the bishop, or for the rook rather, after a sort of h takes g4 maneuver. So h5, very enterprising, but not a bad move. Just very, very, very aggressive intention. Staking the knight on f5, not being challenged. Just very interesting. So bishop g5 was played. Makes sense now that there's no h6 in there. There's no way to harass the bishop. The bishop should go there, presumably. Knight f5, rook c1, getting the rook to the half open c file makes a lot of sense. And again, maybe this move, I'm already starting to question whether this move a3, what the point of it was, because if white started with all this maneuvers and without a3, white would just be a tempo up on the game, and it's not so clear what a3 did for white, but I don't know. So bishop e7 was played, trying to challenge the bishop. Bishop takes, queen b3. I like that move, just connecting the rooks, making sure they're solidly placed. And here, I was very, very impressed with what happened from here on out, because it seemed so radical to do this and unnecessary, but it just showed Duda's will to win. And the move here, as you can see on the right-hand side, was castles queenside. Really, really unnecessary to castle queenside in this position. The king would have been perfectly fine tucked on the king side. There's no real weaknesses. Okay, the h5 pawn maybe is a tiny bit of a weakness, but not so serious. It really begs the question, why castling queenside, why not castle kingside? I do have an answer. I think maybe castles kingside was just a little bit worried about these squares that were weak, and white could now maybe entertain a maneuver with knight e2 and knight f4, and white would probably be a slightly better there, because in a position where black has to go g6 to protect the h5 pawn, there would be even more weaknesses, particularly the f6 square and the h6 square in black's camp. So maybe this knight e2, knight f4 was a source of concern for black, or for black, and that's why they didn't opt to castle kingside. But castling queenside is super aggressive, and the question is it actually a good move? Well, let's find out. So castles queenside. This king the rook is already on c1, lined up against this king. So white went for knight a4, which is a move that makes sense to me. Just trying to get the knight, anchored somewhere where maybe you can create some threats around the king. What were any of the other options? Maybe knight b5 was an option, just because it threatens knight takes a7. But black could just step to the side with king b8, and I'm not so sure what the follow-up would be. I don't know. It's very tricky, very complicated position. It's really tough to say. Maybe in some lines, knight d6 might actually be a move, but this knight is just covering the square, so it's tough. The real problem here is that this knight on f3 doesn't have any scope, and I was trying to get this knight to get to the e5 square, to some square where it's going to do something. But it seems like it just takes way too long to get all the way around. And excuse the arrows, but this knight is it's just hard to move this knight around right now, with these pawns sort of just blocking it, and this knight really serving as a defender of the d4 pawn. The knight a4 didn't, I don't think, lose the game, but I don't know. We'll see. King b8, stepping the king to the side makes a lot of sense. Knight c5, getting that knight to a meaningful square. And now g5. And now I think white really has to come up with something good. And maybe white is already just in trouble already, because, frankly, black is coming really fast with this h5, g5 stuff. And the real issue isn't even checkmate on the king side. It's just this pawn on d4 is going to be hanging. And if the pawn on d4 is lost, the whole position collapses. So that's actually the real problem here, is that there's just not there's it's really hard to defend the d4 pawn with these knights anchored as well as they are. When I saw the knight come to c5, I was thinking, oh, the idea is to go knight a6 check, or even knight takes b7, but both those moves don't work. If knight a6 check, black doesn't actually have to take this knight, which would be a mistake, because then rook takes, and now this pawn would be hanging, and the king would be opened up. Instead, black could just step to the side with king a8, and there's no meaningful follow-up to knight a6 check. So that's one problem. The other problem is that if knight takes b7, king takes b7 would be a big blunder, because queen b5 check, picking up the c6 knight with interest. But really just queen takes b7, and the queen protects the knight, and there's no check. So really just problematic scenarios here for white. And it's amazing with this knight on c5 that there's no meaningful follow-up here. I'm trying to figure one out right now, but I don't know, tough to say. Maybe you guys will turn on the engines and figure out something. But I'm analyzing these games off the cuff, engine free, because this is actually how my process normally is when I'm going through games. I'm just trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong, what my impressions were, and then take something away from it. And then sometimes you confirm that intuition or that thought later, but it's actually quite useful to go over the games without the engine to get a sense of where you think things went wrong. So g5, rook c3 was played. So white pretty much is acknowledging, yeah, I don't have a great follow-up right now. I need more time to build up my initiative on the king side, or on the queen side rather. And the question is, does white have the time to do this? Doesn't really look like it, because after g4 now, this knight has to move, knight d2. And now knight takes d4 is played. And I would assume the idea of rook c3 in part was to transfer the rook to b3 with an attack on the b7 square, maybe creating a weakness if black had to go b6, maybe white would have the a6 and c6 squares. But now the rook can't even transfer to b3. And I'm wondering in the position after g4 if maybe rook b3 should have been tried here, giving up the piece to get in. But the answer is probably no. I can't really talk myself into this. Like if g takes f3, rook takes, queen takes, knight takes, king takes, queen b5 check, I think would need to be played to get the knight, try and get the knight, king c7, and rook c1. And it doesn't work to me, because we're now actually knight f takes d4, and black's threatening knight e2, hitting this queen on b5. And this is just too much material for black. So a rook and two knights for a queen is just too much to give up to get the queen. So it doesn't look like rook b3 worked. And maybe that's what Nisipeanu actually missed when going in for this line, was that couldn't actually transfer the rook after g4. So g4, knight d2, free pawn, like we said. Rook ec1, just trying to get something going on the king side, on the queen side still, but again, the center is like almost collapsing, and now it's just a question of whether black can withstand any, phantom attack that would exist here. And I really like black's move here, rook c8, just saying, now I'm going to bring in my rooks, bring in my defensive resources, and that'll be the end of the game. If I am able to trade some pieces, this pawn is also really weak now. Now it doesn't have any support of the d4 pawn. My knights are super active, and my king is tucked away, so I should have no problems. Knight f1, trying to get a knight to meaningful square. Note if knight b3, black would be happy to trade. Trading probably is a good thing. And actually, funny line actually is rook takes b3. You might think, oh, there's pressure on the b7 pawn. Now black can actually just go king a8, funnily enough, because rook takes b7 actually fails to queen takes, knight takes, and rook c1, winning the game. So, yeah, just a world of hurt everywhere. So, knight f1. And again, like we said, now these rooks are coming in, providing the reinforcements, and rook c6, really good move. The other merit of rook c6 is it just eyes the a6 square as well, so knight a6 check is not really an idea. So rook c6, knight g3, king a8, beautiful prophylaxis. Note that rook c8, I think, would have been met by knight takes f5. You have to take back the knight, and now just a really, maybe a cold shower would have happened with knight a6 check. Because now actually rook takes is impossible because rook takes c8 mate, and if b takes a6, then this rook would actually be hanging because the pawn would have taken on a6 and been overloaded. So really nice idea with king a8 is that you just step the king to the side. It's a prophylactic measure, and there is no check. I started to go back for a moment. There's no check that harasses the king right now. And if you go knight takes here, knight takes, and knight a6, well, black could just trade a pair of rooks and then take on a6, no problem. And that would be the end of the game after queen takes. There's one more threat on c8, but then queen b7 just cuts all those ideas out. So instead, after king a8 was knight takes f5, knight takes f5, and b4, trying to get something going, but we can see this attack just clearly isn't working. Rook hc8 was played, and now, black has fully coordinated a pawn up for nothing. a4 was played, and now black is just ready to trade. Pawn up, safe king, nice pawn structure, just trade pieces. So b6 was played, knight b3, just retreating. Rook takes c3, rook takes c3, rook takes, queen takes, king b7, excellent move. And now the idea is just to transfer the queen to the c file, and again, a pawn up in this ending with pieces, with this knight being so well placed and having such a good pawn structure, is probably just a winning position. So a5 was played, trying to loosen up the position just a little bit, somehow, anyhow. And black played queen d7, a nice little finesse. Basically, black could play queen c7, but maybe after a6 check, and then king b8, maybe black can get away. White could play like queen d3, and the game continues. And this pawn would be a very annoying pawn to deal with. It'd be like what I like to call a thorn pawn, because it allows, if the queen ever got behind somehow, it really provides mating ideas that are very annoying to deal with. So nice little finesse that after a5, you're just going queen b7 to try and get the queen here. I think it's pretty warranted. It's a pretty good idea. So queen d7 was played. Knight d4 was played, just trying to get something going. Black probably should have tried to move. White probably should have moved like g3, just trying to keep some pieces on the board, because trading is not really in white's favor here. But after knight d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4. Now queen c7 was played with the double threat of queen c1 mate and just taking on a5. And white actually resigned here, and black won the game. So very interesting game, and I don't know. I just found it fascinating for a few reasons. One, because black went back in the opening with knight g8, arguing that I have enough time for this relocation to f5, and the decision to castle queenside and really just go for it was something that just sort of demonstrated that from the beginning, Duda was thinking, I'm going to win this game, I want to win this game, and was going to do it by all means necessary. Now, it might seem to, the average player that, resigning here might seem a little bit premature because white's only a pawn down. But again, if you look at the position, checkmate is threatened, another pawn is hanging, and there's no chance of perpetuals here because this king is relatively safe and can hide behind pawns. And the other issue is that white has no space at all. Like, black's pawns on h5 and g4 just command so much space, and this d5 pawn will be a passed pawn that will be a real liability. So even after a move like g3 here, black doesn't even have to go to win this pawn. He can consider going like queen c1 check, king a2, and queen c4, just trying to trade the queens right away, and that would be just as sufficient. So those are just things to think about why the position ended in resignation here. All right, that was my game of the day for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and see you next time. Peace.